Well, awesome. So thanks again for all the speakers for lightning talks. And I'd like to transition to our final part, which is panel discussion. So today with us, we also have Julia Schottenstein, Carla Goudreau, and Chad Sanderson, who are joining us from Fishtown Analytics, Devoted Health, and Convoy, respectively. So I'll just give it a chance for them to introduce themselves before we dive into questions. Julie, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Gleb. It's so great to see DBT mentioned in so many of the lightning talks. I really enjoyed it. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a product manager at Fishtown Analytics. We're the makers of DBT, which is a popular open source project that lets you transform your data. And it also helps you bring a lot of software development best practices into your data workflow. So you can version control your models, you can document them, test it. And part of the Fishtown that I work on is DBT Cloud, which is our hosted offering that lets you schedule DBT runs, brings a lot of CI/CD out of the box for your workflows. We also have a really great IDE in the cloud as well that kind of simplifies the development process for analytics engineers. And before joining Fishtown, I was an investor at a venture capital firm, and I invested in Datafold. So it's fun for me to also be on the operating side and be with all of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. Carla?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Goudreau. I am the head of the data engineering team at Devoted Health. And in addition to data engineering, we're kind of expanding that group a bit. I now oversee a part of the data science team that builds data products, because we're doing that more and more these days, as well as we're starting to build out an analytics engineering team as well, with the use of tools like DBT and soon to be Looker. So super exciting stuff going on in the data world at Devoted Health. And just really quickly, just to give you a quick background of Devoted Health, we are we consider ourselves a payvider. So we pay for healthcare for our seniors by offering a Medicare Advantage insurance plan for seniors in certain states and counties. But in addition to that, we are also a provider because we provide a medical group. So we have doctors and nurses on hand so that we can kind of evaluate our data of our members and take better care of them as a result. So it's a super exciting place. One other thing to note is that we also build all our own technology, which makes the data space in this area even more challenging and exciting. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure if you combine the two worlds of providers and healthcare plans, there's a lot of very interesting and challenging data to work through. And we're actually going to chat about that in a moment. So Chad?
Hey folks, I'm Chad Sanderson. I'm the product lead for the data platform team at Convoy. We're a data engineering and engineering team focused on solving internal data product problems. And we also own a lot of third-party tools and open source technology as well. Convoy is a digital freight brokerage. So we're a Series D company with around a $3 billion valuation based out in Seattle. We have lots of very small data challenges. So small sample sizes, not too many shippers on either side of our B2B marketplace, but lots of machine learning that goes on and sort of powers the heart of our business. So different type of challenge, but still very interesting.
Awesome. So I'd like to start our discussion with talking about data quality at scale. And scale can mean different things, right? The size of organization, the size of data, the just sheer complexity of the data sets. And we have with us today folks from different companies and industries. And so these challenges come in different varieties. And we have three really large companies represented today in terms of the size of their data team. So Shopify, Lyft, and Convoy. So you guys have what, 50, 100, maybe 200, over 200 data users and data developers. So I'm really curious about your point of view on one, my controversial point about investing first in the reliable change management, but actually also more broadly, where have you found the highest ROI in terms of improving the trust and minimizing data downtime in your organizations? So maybe let's start with Chad, since we haven't heard from you yet.
Sure. So I think at a high level and a medium level and a low level, I agree with your point. I think change management is extremely important. In our experience, there's sort of two components to good change management. There's sort of the engineering problem. So when something changes in production, like a service changes, maybe a field gets altered, and that breaks something downstream, and that's pretty critical to understand. And then there's a change to the data warehouse. So data scientist is going to go out and make a change to a table or a column, write a PR or something like that. And both of those have some pretty severe change management issues. Up until recently, we haven't had a great process around either of them. And I think there's sort of a third problem that's sort of maybe floating above the other two, which is that when a data scientist is making a change in the data warehouse, they really are not thinking in terms of tables most of the time. They're thinking in terms of business abstractions. And so when they're making these changes, oftentimes they have a thought in their head of what a column should be or what a table should represent. And maybe that doesn't match what it actually represents, and they don't understand how other people are using it in maybe a way that's different than they thought. So there needs to be some sort of conversation and communication at this like business logic abstraction layer. And it's very challenging for those conversations to actually happen in a structured way. For us, they happen through Slack, right? So people will say like, hey, I'm going to make a change to this table, or I need to understand this table. But that's sort of there is sort of a layer, or like a ceiling or a gap between what one data scientist thinks a change actually means and what it actually means. So that's a problem we're trying to solve as well.
Jason, Michelle, curious on your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Chad was just saying right there. I think a common scenario we hit is this disconnect between producers and consumers. A producer might be some product team producing some events, and they inadvertently introduce a change. Maybe it was to benefit them without any understanding of the downstream impact of that, right? So things like lineage, being able to communicate when consumers feel that pain, being able to communicate back the issues quickly to get remediation, following the steps quickly. I think, at the scale of Lyft, one thing that really we've been working on is you hit on like enforcing a process and changing the culture. We started to realize that, yes, our data, we have data products. We have, and some are more important than others. Not all data means the same to the business. And so the first thing for us was, let's figure out what our core data assets are. Let's invest heavily in those and put those strong guarantees and build a culture around that, and then start to replicate and expand that out. And so that's taken into account all the things you kind of mentioned in your talk. I mean, a big thing for us was we have important data assets that don't have owners, right? So figuring out ownership and stuff like that. So when you get a large enough scale, you have to understand that not all data is equal. Be able to understand how it aligns to the business and invest in that with the right guarantees and strong guarantees.
Yeah, 100%. Not all data sets are equal. As part of our launch with DBT, we wrote like a blog post on Shopify, and it talks a lot more about what we've landed on for this. But one way that we're trying to find this balance between like really quick iteration speed, prototyping data models, and also these like super reliable production finance data sets that shouldn't go down, is trying to bring back this like backroom front room notation, where sort of everything starts by default in the backroom, and we have a lot of restrictions around how they're used, because we make the assumption that they're these sort of data sets with sharp edges, and the owners really understand them and not necessarily the consumers. So we sort of limit like the producer and the consumer of these are the same. And we say that you can't build on top of backroom data sets unless you are that owning team. And this can lead to duplication, but it's kind of okay. Like that duplication is a symptom that this needs some attention on it. A lot of teams want to use it. It's very high value, and it's an indication that it's important. We should redesign this and promote it up and add more checks. And so it's kind of a way to actually tease that out. So far, it's not really something we've launched. There's a lot of like controversial discussion around this, but that's kind of our early thinking, is more of like the life cycle of the data set as opposed to classifying it right up front. Like design the front room model first, design the back room model first. It's like everything starts in back room, and let's just naturally see where it goes. Yeah. In terms of return on investment, for sure, the change management has been super useful for us on the like event instrumentation side, and having schematized events flow through and like strict evolution rules and things like that. I think that's been really, really great. We launched that like 2 years ago, and it's got crazy adoption. And just a stable thing that we can make assumptions and guarantees on, like the schema is not going to change tomorrow without very explicit process and communication.
Interesting. And so, Michelle, on your point about the background data, so it sounds like what you guys did is you enable everyone who wants to build data with the ability to build data, right? With your DBT plus BigQuery stack, which kind of lowers the barrier. Mm-hmm. But you, at the same time, restrict other data users and data developers to essentially use that data, right, before it got, let's say, promoted to being sort of core or validated, right? And therefore, you minimize the risks of people being dependent, or data products being dependent on something that doesn't have an SLA, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. And I'm curious also, Jason and Chad, how does it happen in your organizations? But also, Carla and Alex, how do you feel about enabling versus restricting and maintaining that tricky balance where you want organization to move fast, but at the same time, if it moves too fast and people just build whatever they want and source data wherever they want, maybe it can be really hard to take, the responsibilities really doesn't exist, doesn't concentrate anywhere, right?
Yeah, I can say a couple points on that. I think there's two aspects where we face that. One is tooling and being able to, there is a gap, but we can't wait on a platform team to build these tools. And so you end up with this fragmented landscape of like data quality tools, and that's what we face at Lyft. And then the other part is, again, getting back, not all data is the same. So we're trying to go after this idea of, just like we tiered services, there's tiers of data products, and the process and the requirements to be a higher tier data set, or more important to the business, has additional requirements that it purposefully slows down the agility, because the impact, there's too much risk there. We're still formalizing those ideas, but that's kind of the direction we're going to help mitigate this. That if you want to move quickly with new data, go ahead. But if you're going to be touching some core data asset, it's thoughtful. There's going to be some group committee governance going on around there before any actions are made.
Yeah, that's actually very similar to our approach as well, at least the way that we've been thinking about it for the last year or so. There is we sort of leveraged very heavily early on being a startup and giving everybody data access and letting them do really whatever they wanted. And we've seen a couple problematic things happen as a result of that. The first one is, so we're very heavy DBT users, and DBT is awesome. We use a few other sort of open source BI tools like Metabase and things like that. And what we saw happening is, when everybody had access to do anything, the cost of building something new was actually lower than the cost of finding previously created information and leveraging that. And so you have this explosion of information, and now nobody is really sure like what the true source of truth is. And when changes get made all across the business, people are just making changes to things all the time. That's when you see a lot of these like downstream issues, like, oh, my model broke or my report broke because I'm taking a dependency on something and I have no idea what it even is really. So there was and that sort of led to another issue where like there was just so much stuff that the concept of data ownership wasn't really a thing. So data scientists at Convoy fall under our product organization. So when they are going through their sort of yearly reviews and quarterly reviews, they're mainly judged on like basis points impact to margin and other business metrics like that. And they're not really held accountable to quality in the same way that a software engineer is. And so it led to data scientists oftentimes saying, okay, yeah, I know something broke, but it's much easier for me to put together a hacky solution just so I can get through it than to invest in something scalable. And because they didn't receive any award for that, there was no reason for them to do that. They didn't there was no benefit for them to do that. So there are some like really big cultural elements that we're trying to change around data quality. And then the other thing the way that I've sort of been thinking of it is one of the reason our code base has actually matured in a pretty nice way is because all of the tooling around change management, Gleb, as you've sort of implied, like GitHub is awesome. And that sort of principle of treating the data model like a code base doesn't really exist for the data science team. And it should just not just in terms of tables and columns, but also like the aggregations and the metrics that people end up using in reports. So having some single place where you can say, I have a metric, I have an aggregation that is valuable to the business, and now I'm ready for everybody to start taking dependencies on this and using it and reporting it sort of up the chain. I want to commit it to one place, and it should go through a review process.
Yeah, just to add to that, Chad, it seems like we have a lot of the same types of problems at Devoted Health as you do in your company, and the fact that we're a fairly new startup. We're only 4-ish years old, and we started giving access to all the things, which is the opposite of what I'm used to being at previous companies. So there are definitely pros and cons to that approach. The pros are you can develop super quickly and get the business up to speed very quickly. But as we all know, as data people on this call, there are lots of cons with respect to data quality. And at a healthcare company, we have the added kind of thing to think about, which is compliance. We have to be compliant because we report our metrics to the government. So add in that lovely extra added bonus, we absolutely have to add in checks and balances and tooling to ensure that, something like allowing a software engineer the ability to drop a column in a table in our source system is we have to make sure that that's not possible to do if it's a column that we rely on for compliance reasons. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
I'd be also curious to hear, so from Carl and Alex, how do you maintain high speed of development in an environment where, with very strict regulations, right, for access to data? Because, I think we're all, for B2C consumer companies, we're all used to sort of just develop on production and, people, writing SQL and having access to everything, at least in the early days, right? And so I imagine that your world is somewhat different. So how do you maintain high speed of development where you have to think about these things from the day one?
That's a great question. I can start just giving you my high level of some of the things Devoted has done to address this issue. Again, being a fairly new startup, I do think that some of the decisions we made early on have bode us well for this type of thing. As an example, we have a mono repo for everything, data, all of our software eng. So we're like, everyone's fully aware of what's going on in the code base, which at first I didn't like, but now I've come to realize we need that. Another thing is we use lots of generated code. So we use like protobuf for all of our source of truth on the data side, which makes it a little more doable for this kind of work. So as an example, I just talked about, for compliance reasons, we want to make sure we flag certain things in the proto as sensitive or as needed for compliance reasons. So don't ever mess with this. Because we have that single source of truth in the protobuf layer, we're able to do that kind of stuff. So I'll say good decisions in the beginning definitely helped, but on the reporting and analytics side, it's definitely messier. So I could talk about that as well as we go on, but I'll let I'll let Alex speak as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just hugely uptight, so this is like not really an issue for me. I'm like always whining that things aren't like, documented and strict enough. But there actually do have a number of like initiatives kind of around this right now. So again, we're in a unique position. We're not part of our engineering team, so we can kind of build our own culture. And there's 5 of us, so even as the company is scaling, we're scaling, but at a smaller level. So we can kind of make some changes and pivot a little bit faster on this stuff. So some of the things we've done is we really lean into DBT and some of the, not just that tool, but the tools around that. So integrations with looking at using the pre-commit DBT pre-commit tool, I keep calling it the super label, but exposures, pre-commit, to kind of make sure we have all these checks and start to, as we grow, be like, okay, like this is PII and like it's cascading outward here. This is HIPAA, it's cascading outward here. Our data warehouse is Snowflake, and so we purchased that and built it for our team. So it's people have to opt in; they don't like naturally have access, and so we're putting together a formal process where, like, if you want to have that kind of raw data access, like you're a product manager, right? Like you should be able to see what's in the tables. You have to be able to see what's in the tables. Like the business owner needs to sign off on that at like the highest level. Like there's a workflow, like legal's involved. I'm tagging the VP of security like obnoxiously frequently in our Jira tickets of like, hey, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And so I don't know. I think just being able to have that autonomous full stack unit allows us to kind of own something. If someone's like, oh, like that's actually, that should not be there, right? Like 2 people make an MR, like they co-sign it, we broadcast in Slack, it's fixed like 45 minutes later. So kind of an argument in favor of having that kind of full stack role.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And I think the reason why it's also, the insights that both, Alex and Carla have just shared are broadly applicable to everyone is because, these are examples of companies that are startups, and it means that they're moving really fast. They are on the modern data stack. They ship high quality data products despite being highly regulated. And so it's just an example for everyone else, right? So even if you're not in a highly regulated industry, that doesn't mean that you can't apply reliable and compliance-minded practices from the very beginning, right? It's still possible, especially with the modern data tools. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and speak about tools themselves. So we have Julia and Caitlin and myself included, who are vendors in this space, in that we build tools to help everyone who's building data products lives easier. And so I'd like to start with asking a question. There was a lot of praise towards DBT. I think it's a great product, but I'm really curious, Julia, to hear your opinion on what do you think data tools, maybe DBT included, are still missing? What are the things that we still have to deliver to the data community that we haven't, in terms of the principles for reliable data product building?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So at DBT, what we really want to accomplish is we want to be the standard for how you build and transform your models. We want things like quality and testing to be a first order principle of how you build your modern data stack. And our product's open source. You can get most of the benefit of DBT without paying us anything. And we love that because we think that this is just moving the whole industry forward. One of the really interesting things that I keep seeing is both this tension that we already brought up between reliability, durability, trustability of your data, and ease of consuming those models or understanding those models by business owners. That's a challenge that's really, really hard that I don't think we've solved yet. But the other interesting one I wanted to talk about is just how the stacks become more unbundled. You're getting tools that tackle different parts or different problems. Carla, you mentioned PII data specifically, like there are whole companies that focus on that. And I think that's a great thing because the opportunity is so large for companies to focus on, specialize in different areas. The challenge then becomes interoperability and having this open ecosystem where you can use all of these products and still solve your problem at the end of the day, which is I need reliable data. I need to give good answers and help with decision making in my company. And so that really, in my mind, is a huge challenge that we as vendors, as you called us, or but just participants in the ecosystem have to think about is the end user. How do these all kind of stitch together and deliver really good, at the end of the day, better data stack versus more confusing?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the interoperability between data tools is an emerging trend, and I think there are a few players, like for example DBT, that are or some metadata platforms as well, that are really well positioned to be sort of the hubs of the data and exchange. And we don't see right now many protocols for how this exchange happens, or what is the format of data, or what is the way that we all communicate. But that's definitely something that we also sense from our standpoint when we are working with customers. So also trying to bake it in the product. Yeah, just to give an example, so Amundsen recently, which is a really great metadata platform built by Lyft, announced that they have an ability to natively support data lineage, which we spoke about earlier, right? Why is it important? And it's also important to be part of your sort of data discovery and bridging the gap between producers and consumers. But but Amundsen itself doesn't support lineage as a metadata piece. So you have to pretty much bring it on yourself. And it's a really hard problem because it requires static code analysis. So one thing that we did, for example, is build an API that allows to take lineage from Datafold and bring it into Amundsen. For example, if you want to use that as your metadata platform. I know that DBT also offers an API for pulling out metadata that already exists in your sort of DBT models and manifests, so you can also distribute that to other tools. So Caitlin, also curious to hear where do you think is your vision for where your product should go, and broadly the sort of notebook / product building experience?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very broad question in terms of where we're gonna go. I do think, to sort of like jump on to what Julia was saying, I think that's a really interesting area that we're thinking about a lot right now, which is what are the interfaces between our product and the rest of the data stack, and how do you do that in a way that doesn't mean that we have to go through and build, there's so many different products, and we want people to be able to use the products that fit their workflow the best and not have that sort of make decisions for them elsewhere in the stack. But how do you do that without sort of solving this n-squared problem where you have to build integrations between all of the different, every single different data tool? And so we've been thinking a lot about that, about how do we put Hex into a format where we can kind of just unlock all of these different sort of creative solutions that users might have. And maybe we build a few first class integrations, but maybe we also just have right now where we're thinking about okay, well, if you could manipulate all of this stuff, through your GitHub repos and things like that, all of a sudden then you have this integration point that it works with your CI, it works with your, models, it works with all of those things. And so really thinking through some of those sort of key, you were saying, sort of you end up with these nexi of places where you can integrate with, and then that unlocks a huge amount of user creativity. I think some of the other stuff that we're really, really excited about is kind of going beyond notebooks. It's okay, so we have a notebook model and people love notebooks. And so that's kind of why we started there. It's a very powerful, very familiar paradigm, allows people to get started really easily. But what are some of these more powerful computation techniques? I think a good example is introducing reactivity and things like that on top of a notebook paradigm that allow people to do in some ways more flexible and more powerful data analysis, but also kind of build these more performant and more responsive data apps. And so we're doing a bunch of explorations there, and okay, can we actually take the notebook computation paradigm and push that forward and build on top of that to unlock sort of new abilities and new superpowers for users who are building with those.
Wow, reactive notebooks. That sounds really cool. Yeah, so super excited about the conversation today. I wish we could go for more, but I also wanted to give everyone a chance to grab a brief before their next round of meetings. And thank you very much, all the speakers and panelists today. Thank you for contributing your time into preparing, thinking, sharing your ideas. Everyone here does really awesome work in their domains. And to everyone who is listening in today live and will be watching recording, stay tuned for new meetups. We'll have another one probably in July later this year. And we'll be also sending out a digest of the meetup with all the talks as well as the panel recorded and summarized in bullet points. So happy data building, and see you soon.